No one expected Dakota Johnson's voice to tremble the way it did that night. She stood under the soft lights of a private farewell event, trying to hold herself together while dozens of familiar faces watched in stunned silence. Her breath shook every time she inhaled, as if each memory of Jamie Dornan pressed painfully against her ribs. And when she finally lifted her eyes to speak, the room felt like it was holding its breath for her. She began slowly, carefully, like someone stepping barefoot through broken glass. "There are people who come into your life and change you in ways you never forget," she said, her voice thin and tight. Her fingers trembled as she held the microphone, and a few strands of hair fell across her wet eyelashes. It was clear she hadn't just cried before speaking, she had fought a storm. Dakota tried to smile, but the attempt collapsed almost immediately. The crowd could see the way her throat moved as she tried to swallow her emotions back down. "I didn't think this day would come," she whispered, glancing at the floor as though afraid of what would spill out if she looked up. The heaviness in her voice wrapped around the room like fog. When she finally said Jamie's name, the entire room shifted. "Jamie," the word escaped her like a sigh she'd been holding for years. She paused, closing her eyes as tears escaped again, tracing soft, desperate lines down her cheeks. It was the kind of moment that made people look away, not out of discomfort, but because the intimacy was almost too real. She lifted her gaze toward him at last. Jamie stood only a few feet away, his expression carved from something deeper than sadness. His shoulders slumped, his breath unsteady, and his eyes filled with a pain he couldn't disguise. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. He simply stood there absorbing every word Dakota forced herself to release. "I don't know how to imagine things without him," Dakota said, her voice cracking so hard the microphone distorted. Gasps rippled across the room as if the words had physically struck everyone listening. Her voice wasn't theatrical, it wasn't scripted, it sounded like truth. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself on the podium. "We've lived so many years side by side, through chaos, through laughter, through things I can't even put into words." She wiped her face with shaking fingers, failing to catch the tears that kept falling. "He has been more than a colleague, more than a friend. He has been a part of my soul." Jamie's jaw tightened as he looked down, unable to withstand the intensity of her confession. His silence became louder than anything she could have said. Fans would later analyze this moment frame by frame, convinced he was fighting back tears. Dakota continued, though every syllable seemed to cost her something. "Tonight is goodbye," she whispered, and several people in the crowd audibly gasped. "I wish it didn't have to be. I wish timing were kinder. I wish life were simpler." Her voice wavered dangerously, like a structure about to collapse. Behind her, someone handed her a tissue, but she barely noticed. "Jamie, I want to thank you," she said, her voice growing faint. "For being my safe place when everything else was loud. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For making the darkest days feel a little less heavy." The memories playing behind her eyes were visible in the way her lips trembled. Jamie's stillness became unbearable to watch. His face had gone pale, and he clenched his hands together in front of him as if they were the only things anchoring him. The silence coming from him was a silence full of unsaid things: regret, longing, fear, or maybe all of them. Dakota took one final breath before delivering the words that broke the entire room. "Goodbye, Jamie," she whispered, voice cracking into a soft, agonizing sob. "I don't know how to let you go, but I have to." The microphone dropped slightly as her shoulders folded inward, the weight of the moment too heavy to stand beneath. The crowd couldn't hold back their emotions. Several people cried openly, stunned by the emotional rawness unfolding before them. Even the camera recording the moment shook slightly, as if the person holding it had lost control. It didn't feel like a scripted farewell. It felt like a heartbreaking in real time. And through it all, Jamie remained completely silent. No statement. No protest. No explanation. Just a man standing in the ruins of a connection he never expected to lose. Hollywood would replay this moment endlessly, searching for answers in every tear and every breath. But the question left hanging in the air was one that no one, not even Jamie, seemed ready to answer. Why did Dakota Johnson have to say goodbye? And what pain lies behind Jamie's silence? The silence after Dakota's goodbye wasn't just silence, it was devastation wrapped in stillness. Jamie Dornan stood frozen for several seconds, as though his mind refused to process the words he had just heard. His eyes glistened under the dim lights, reflecting a cocktail of shock, sorrow, and something dangerously close to regret. People around him instinctively stepped back, sensing that he was enduring something too personal, too painful to witness. When Dakota stepped off the stage, her legs wobbled, and she nearly stumbled before catching herself. A friend rushed to support her, whispering something soft and comforting, but Dakota barely reacted. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the kind that come from trying not to collapse. She wiped her face repeatedly, but the tears kept falling as if they had been waiting for years to escape. Jamie finally moved, one small step forward, then another, before stopping abruptly, as if an invisible wall had risen between them. His hands twitched as if he wanted to reach out, to go to her, to offer something, anything. But he didn't, he couldn't. The weight of her goodbye pinned him in place, suffocating the words he could not bring himself to say. A crew member later described it perfectly. It looked like two people who loved each other too late. The kind of heartbreak where timing becomes the villain and silence becomes the crime. Jamie stared at Dakota as she disappeared behind the curtains, his jaw trembling with unspoken emotions. He looked like a man watching the most important part of his life walk away, and knowing he had no right to stop her. Backstage, Dakota collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands as sobs shook her shoulders. Her makeup smeared, her breathing uneven, her entire body trembling from the emotional toll of what she had just done. A friend knelt beside her, rubbing her back, whispering, "You did the right thing." Dakota shook her head violently, choking out, "Then why does it hurt so much?" Her voice cracked, breaking the hearts of everyone who heard her. Meanwhile, Jamie slipped out of the venue through a side door, avoiding cameras and reporters. Once outside, he leaned against the cold brick wall, inhaling sharply as the night air hit him. He wasn't crying, but his eyes told the story. Pain sat heavy beneath them, grief carved into the lines of his face. He looked upward, swallowing hard, as though trying to steady himself against an emotion he'd spent years refusing to confront. Hollywood immediately spun the narrative into chaos. Articles speculated about the cause of Dakota's farewell speech. Was it a final goodbye to a friendship? An emotional closing to years of unresolved tension? Or something deeper? Something the public had only ever felt hints of but never seen fully? Fans fought passionately online, trying to decode every expression, every pause, every breath from both Dakota and Jamie. Some believed Dakota was protecting herself from a bond that was too painful, too complicated to maintain. Others insisted Jamie must have made a decision that forced her to step away for her own sanity. A few even argued that Dakota's goodbye was an act of love, letting go because holding on hurt too much. A source close to Jamie offered another heartbreaking perspective. He didn't know she felt that deeply, the source revealed. He thought he was keeping his distance to protect her, not realizing it was slowly destroying her. This revelation tore through the fandom like wildfire, adding layers to a story already drowning in emotion. Dakota finally spoke again later that night through a brief social media message. It was just one line, white text on black background. "Some goodbyes save you, even when they break you." The internet fell apart instantly, with thousands of comments pouring in, fans crying, fans confused, fans begging for clarity that neither Dakota nor Jamie seemed prepared to give. Hours after her post, Jamie's car was spotted parked outside a quiet overlook in the hills. He sat inside alone, forehead resting against the steering wheel, as if trying to breathe through the ache in his chest. A photographer captured the moment from afar, the single streetlight illuminating the outline of a man unraveling in the dark. The picture went viral instantly. Hollywood insiders said this wasn't closure, it was a wound. A wound shared between two hearts that had been entangled for years, always drifting too close, always pulling too far, never fully meeting in the middle. Dakota's goodbye wasn't a clean break. It was the kind that leaves both sides bleeding. What no one knew yet was whether this goodbye was forever, or if it was the painful step both Dakota and Jamie needed before the truth, whatever it was, finally surfaced. Because sometimes goodbyes aren't endings. Sometimes they're the beginning of the story that was never allowed to be told.